Okay, so here's that last answer from the previous video. So we're going to go trying right here, number 10. So we're looking to see what all these numbers have in common. All of those numbers divide by 2. They're all even. That's the highest thing they have in common. All the m's are m squareds. So we're going to take out m squareds. Of all the n's, I'm looking at n to the third, n to the second, and then no n's at all. So this is really like n to the 0, which means they have no n's in common. I don't get to take anything out. So my greatest common factor is 2m squared. When I divide by 2, 4 divided by 2 makes 2. M squared divided by m squared cancels, and I get n to the third left over. 2 divided by 2 cancels, m squared divided by m squared cancels, and I'm left with n squared. Make sure you put that plus sign to differentiate that it's a new thing. Okay, then 6 divided by 2 makes 3. M squared cancels, and I had no n's anyways. So now my factored answer, I write the 2m in front, and then I write all of this in back. 2n to the third plus n squared plus 3. Okay. So it's really important that if I have a negative, even if the other numbers aren't negative, if I have a negative in the front, that I pull a negative out. Divide by -1, divide by -1. But it doesn't have to be a 1. It could be any other number. So like 6 and 24 have a 6 in common. They both divide by 6. X squared and x both have an x. I'm going to pull an x out. So my GCF is -6x. That negative changes all my signs. So now my front piece is positive, and it's just an x left over. Notice that it's an x because this was x squared, and now I have one less of them. Okay, if you really need to visually see that still, that's x squared. Looks like x times x, and if I divide that by an x, I get rid of one of them. Okay, then this positive sign changes to a negative sign because I'm dividing by a negative, and a positive divided by a negative makes a negative. 24 divided by 6 makes 4. X divided by x makes, like, cancels out, goes away. So I have -6 x minus 4. Okay, going to B. So this one has a negative in front. We're going to divide by a negative. It doesn't matter if all the other signs are negative or not. We're going to divide by a negative. 14 and 35 both divide by 7. They have an x in common. They have an x in common. So -7x. That -7x goes in the front of my factored answer. I'm left with some parentheses. That's all of my leftovers. So that negative and negative cancel into positives. That negative and negative cancel into positives. 14 divided by 7 makes 2. X squared divided by x makes just an x. 35 divided by 7 makes a positive 5. X divided by x cancels. Let's go to C. I have a negative in front, which means I divide everything by a negative. I divide everything by a 2 because they're all even. I divide everything by an m because they all have an m in common. So my GCF is negative 2m. That gets rewritten right there. Okay. Then that negative turns into a positive. 2 divided by 2 cancels. M to the 4th divided by m makes m to the 3rd. Okay. Let's do it again. A positive divided by a negative makes a negative. 14 divided by 2 makes 7. M squared divided by m makes an m. Last one. A negative divided by a negative cancels and makes a positive. 6 divided by 2 makes 3. M divided by m cancels, goes away. So I didn't finish writing right here because they don't really have that line anymore, see? So if you still need that line, you can use it, but if you don't need that line, you don't need it. Okay, let's do it again. I'm going to show this one slightly different way. I'm going to divide the whole thing by the same thing. So that whole problem, I'm going to divide by the same numbers and letters. So they have to use a negative. I have to use a number. I'm like, are they all even? No. Well, this has a 0, that has a 5, that has a 0. I'm going to say they all divide by 5. Because that has a 0, that has a 5, that has a 0. They all divide by 5. They all have a y in common. But they have more than one y in common. They each have at least 2 y's. So my GCF is negative 5y squared. So that goes in the front of my factored answer. Now I have to figure out what my leftovers are. When I do that, my negative divides by my negative and makes a positive. My negative divides by my negative and makes a positive. My 20 divides by my 5 and makes a 4. My y to the 4th divides by my y squared, which means I really just cancel them, and I get y to the 2nd. Let's do it again. This time I'll keep my colors. Okay, so I have a negative 15 divided by negative 5. Keep in mind that negative is still there. We're reusing and reusing and reusing. This gives me a positive 3 because a negative divided by a negative cancels. I had a y squared, or I had a y to the 3rd divided by a y squared. That results in me canceling as much as I can, which gives me 1 y left over. In my last piece, I need to do 30 that was positive divided by a negative. So that results in a negative. The 30 positive divided by negative 5 gives me negative 6. The y squared divided by y squared cancels. And I'm left with just that as my answer. Okay. So we can check our work by then going and remultiplying. So right now I can see my previous page. I can see that negative 2m, m to the third minus 7m plus 3. Let's try it. Negative 2m times m to the third makes negative 2m to the fourth. Negative times a negative makes a positive. 2 times 7 makes 14. M times m makes m squared. Negative times a positive makes a negative. 2 times 3 makes 6. M times nothing left gives me just an m. Let's go check and make sure that that was our original problem. Negative 2m to the fourth plus 14m squared minus 6m. Totally fine. So the way we check is by distributing. Or multiplying. What can we call the process of finding the greatest common factor? Okay, we call this just factoring. Finding the greatest common factor in all the polynomials, then write the polynomial all factored out. Okay, so let's see if I can do this super quick. Divide, divide. Do they have a y in common? No. Do they both divide by 2? Yes, but they divide by a higher number than 2. So let me show you. 36 divides by 2, and I'm left with 18. 18 divides by 2, and I'm left with 9. 9 divides by 3, and I'm left with 3. 3 divides by 3, and I'm left with 1. Okay, let's look at 24. 24 divides by 2, and I'm left with 12. 12 divides by 2, and I'm left with 6. 6 divides by 2, and I'm left with 3. 3 divides by 3, and I'm left with 1. Sorry, you can't see that piece that I just did. Okay, so right here, they have a 2 in common, they have a 2 in common. They have a 2 in common, they have a 2 in common. They have a 3 in common, they have a 3 in common. This means that 2 times 2 times 3 is what they have in common. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. Divide by 12, divide by 12. 36 divided by 12 is 3. Y minus 2. That's not your final answer. You need to write that big thing in front, the 12. Okay, let's do it again. These are all even. They all contain a 2. They all have x's, but at the most they have x squared. That's what they share. 4 divided by 2 makes 2. X to the 5th divided by x squared makes x to the 3rd. I'm subtracting. 6 divided by 2 makes a negative 3. X to the 2nd. 10 divided by 2 makes a positive 5x. Is all gone, and I'm left with just that. That's all I'm going to get to on this video. You are not going to do this trapezoid part. We will do it tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean Monday. You will do all of these. Okay, so I'm going to go and do another video.